Cool. So let's go back to here. So as I was saying, we can write the CSS style here in the style tag, but more commonly, we're going to be using the link tag to link the CSS style sheet with the document. Also, we want to be specific and also add what type of link this is. And for that, we have rel, the attribute rel, which stands for relationship. What's the relationship of this document to the HTML? And in this case, we say style sheet. And we just forget if the link is self-closing or not. Let's look at, so it is self-closing. Okay, so now I'm going to have a todos.css, and I'm going to link that CSS file with my HTML file. But what happens if I go to my page and I refresh? My beautiful background is gone, and I have this error popping up. Get file todos.css error file not found. So this is to say my HTML code is trying to grab this CSS page to link it to my HTML, and it cannot find it. So let's create it. Here, I'm just going to do create file with this button, todos.css. Just like that. Now let's refresh the page. Unless the error is gone, because we now have a CSS file, it's just that now the file is empty. Let's put my beautiful background again. I refresh the page and I get my background back. Questions here as to where the CSS code will go. Yes, Cameron.
Who doesn't like slashes and dots? Like, is that?
Where do you mean that?
The HTML. You put that. Oh, I guess the slash at the end of it didn't work.
Oh yeah.
That's a no-go?
Yes, this will be a different thing. This will be a folder called todos.css. So don't add trailing slash at the end. So here, a question you might be wondering is, well, the script tag is a little bit makes a little bit more sense because you could even write the code inside the script tag or specify a source to link it from an external source. And with the style sheet, we have to change tags. We cannot say style source come from this CSS file. We have to change tags, and we use the link tag instead of this style. The style doesn't have a source. For those interested, I was looking at this. Look at this article. Why isn't it style.source instead of so that it looks more like the script tag? I'm gonna put this in the Slack channel for those of you that are interested in reading that. Just remember that for now we have to change tags from the style to the link to be able to associate that style sheet with our HTML document. Refreshing, we are all good. Okay, so let's look at the actual syntax of CSS code. So CSS, what I have here is called a CSS rule, and a rule has a few pieces. One is this part, the first part here, is called the selector. Here is what do I want to select? What do I want to style? In this case, these selectors here, just like the selectors that we use for query selector, we can grab elements by ID, by class, and by tag name. In this case, I'm grabbing the element by, or my selector is the tag name. I'm grabbing the body. So this will be this guy here. The body, right? And I'm just having, okay, so this is the selector. The next thing that we have is the curly brackets. And the curly brackets will specify what properties in the body do I want to change. And here you have sort of like very similar to JavaScript objects. You have a set of properties with a value separated by a column. So the property that I want to change is the background color of the body. And I want that background color to be equal to aquamarine. This is also another reason to switch to VS Code. Oh, I think it's because it's too big. It should let me. Yeah, and it opens up. If I hover over here, it opens up this palette that I can change the color like that, which is sort of neat. And it will update it for me. So let's just put it back. Okay, so the syntax is basically the selector and then the property colon and then the value of that property. Let's add another. I want to change another property. Not only I want to change the background color, but I want to change another property called just color. And I want it to be red. Now let's see what we have in our code, in our browser. Refresh. Now we have the background color of the body is aquamarine, and the color of all the text inside the body will be red. Look at what happens when I add one element. That text is red. Even the bullet point will be red. Oh, well, we seem to have another bug. When I add an element, it's already crossed out. But we're not going to solve that bug now because we're on CSS. So that's CSS. That's correct. We changed the text decoration with CSS as well. We're going to see how that was like the first CSS that we did, which is adding the text decoration without maybe us thinking about that being CSS. Okay. So in here, what we have is the selector, which is the body. We have property and a value. This pair of property and values we call a declaration. And declarations are separated from each other by the semicolon. Let's look what happens if we forget the semicolon. One is my text editor is showing me these quick little lines. Let's hover over one and see what it says. Sets the background color of an element. Semicolon expected. Okay, let's see what it says here. At rule or selector expected. Okay, that's not very helpful, but this one does say semicolon expected. Let's see what we get. I'm going to save this. I'm going to refresh my page, and now my CSS is broken. So that's another thing about CSS. It doesn't complain as loudly as JavaScript complains when you have errors. In fact, doesn't complain at all. Just your browser will ignore styles that it couldn't understand. So that's why you want to style, once we have other elements, you want to style them one by one. And be sure to check the style as you modify something in the style, just refresh the page and see it change. Because if you write 50 lines of CSS and there is one error somewhere, then you will have a hard time finding where the error actually is. Because again, we don't get errors, yeah. So in here, remember that declarations are separated by semicolons, should always be terminated with semicolon. So here there's this other example, which is not different from what we have. This. We have the selector on this side, the first declaration, which is color blue. Color is the color of the text. And then we are changing another property called font size to be equal to 12 pixels. Questions on the syntax? So let's try this. Let me give you some time to try this out. Instead of changing create another CSS rule in here, you're going to create another CSS rule that instead of, I don't want the color of the body to be red, I want the color of the li elements to be red. So take some time to write another CSS rule that will make sure that the text inside your LIs is red. Let's take 5 minutes for doing that. Oh, I also put it on the Slack channel, the 6.2 web code. Yeah, unless it should make it possible, you should probably just have one that's right. Thinking outside and do that rest of okay. Oh, I see some really cool styles with the background, a background black and the color red. Looks cool. We could even see, we could change, if you wanted, like, you could get really creative with this. You could have the font maybe be sort of like a font that resembles blood. And then you make that red and a background black, and then you get a really crappy, not crappy, creepy, a really creepy, a really creepy to-do app. Cool. So any questions with selecting an element and changing some of the CSS properties of that? Yes, Malik.
You changed it before for the code property side of the body.
Uh-huh.
You didn't have to specify text, or you have to specify what you're changing.
Like, you mean that I could do, let's do like, I want to select the LIs and color. So you're saying like, why don't I have to say color or like color text?
Well, not that, but like forming the inside of the body.
Uh-huh.
You have to specify like the style.
Oh. So that's also the cascading effect. So that's one of the things that cascading refers to. Every child of the body will get this color unless we override it. So let's look at this for instance. If we do call friend, everything that's a child, the body will be of this color. But now let's do the LIs. I want the color to be blue. Let's refresh. Call friend. Now this LI, because this CSS rule is selecting the LI. By default, the LI will get a color red because the parent, which is the body, has a color red. But here I'm overriding that and saying, no, I want this LI to be of color blue. We're gonna get to see some of that in here in the HTML or in the developer tools rather. Cool. Let me make sure. Okay, yeah, you just want to make sure that you are following the CSS syntax, which is properties. Note that we don't have quotes around. We just have the name of the property, colon, and then the value of the property. No quotes around it or anything like that. And we finalize one of these declarations by adding the semicolon. Right? Cool. So there's also some colors in CSS. You will find out that some of them have names like red, but you could also specify the RGB, which is red, blue, and green. And you can specify, that's where you get more, like, I don't remember how many colors you will get. You get 255 times 255 times 255 colors. And that's this, like when I hover over red, here, you see this RGB. This is, the first value is the red, the second value, this 0 is the green, and the last value is the blue. So this is those are the three basic colors with which you can create any other color. So if I move this around here, for instance, you can see that my red is 135, then I have a green of 72, and I have a blue of 72 as well. So this is another way in which you can create more complicated colors. Like with this, you get more colors than the human eye can differentiate. Cool. So, and there are some that have the just common names like red, which is also really handy. Okay, so let's add this one. Let's add this other rule, H1. I want the H1s to be color. I'm just going to change the font size. I'll do 12 pixels. Here also, numbers like this, we also add a postfix or a suffix, pixels, and there are other measurements. We could even say inches. We could say, I want this text to be 12 inches. What are we going to get? let's try first 12 pixels. Refresh. Now my H1, or rather all the H1s, in this case I just have one, is going to be 12 pixels, but there are others, like I think inch is 1. Now refresh, and it turns out that I have an H tag that is 12 inches in font size. I'll have to zoom out to be able to see it. Look at this. So that is another. So there are, just be aware that there are other measurements you could use for font size, width, etc. Okay, let's go back here. Nice. Format CSS Reset. So, okay, so it turns out that browsers have default style sheet. So browsers already modify the style in which elements appear. So that, for instance, this button, it looks like it has a really tiny border that is sort of grayish to signify that's a button. It also makes that blue effect. The text box, you see that the background of the text box is white. And it also has a really small border surrounding it. So let's look at those default styles. For now, I'm going to comment out my CSS. If you are in VS Code, that's just command /, and this is how you comment CSS code. You select the code and then command /, and it just adds this */***. So here, I just want to do this because I want to show you the default styles and how you can inspect them in your browser. So let's open up the browser, let's refresh. We get our default styles. So by default, this H1 has a font size defined by the browser. And again, what I was showing about this gray border around the button, all those are defaults. Okay, so I want to show you this in Chrome, and I'm going to show you the same one in Firefox, which is another web browser. Just so that you see that different browsers have different default styles. I'm going to paste, I hit enter. Look at the differences. They're somewhat hard to notice. But this is how Firefox will show the same page. I think I see a difference between like the height of this input box. Is this one like slightly shorter than this one? Right, it's slightly shorter. Even the H1 is somewhat also, maybe because it's shorter, the H1 is a little bit lower. Look at the button. The buttons look different. The Firefox one is a little bit wider, right? And it doesn't have that border as thick as the one in Google Chrome. And you can even see that, yeah, it's slightly shorter as well. And even if, I don't know if you can notice, but look at the button carefully, and I'm reducing this zoom. At some point in here is a completely different button. Now you see like the background here is sort of gray in the button. As I reduce the zoom, the background becomes white. And now it has some, the borders, I'm not sure if I can do. Does this has a like glass? What do you call the thing to zoom in? Say that again?
Magnifier.
Magnifier? Oh, this doesn't have a magnifier. Okay, magnifying glass. I think, no, this is something else. But anyway, I think you can see it. This has like rounded edges, or rounded corners rather. So this is fine sometimes, but most of the times what we want is we want our website to look the same across different browsers, no matter if the user is in Firefox or the user is in Chrome or in Microsoft Edge, those are the top browsers. So for making that more consistent, what we have is something called a CSS Reset, which is we reset certain properties in CSS so that all the browsers are more consistent with what we want. Right? But also, before we do that, I wanted to show you the default styles. So it turns out that if you do right-click anywhere and inspect, our developer tools has on the right side this styles, computed, event listener, etc. tabs, and here I'm clicking in the HTML, and it shows me the style sheet for the HTML. So note here that it says on the right, user agent style sheet. User agent just means browser. Is who is acting in behalf of the user on a website, which is the browser. So this is what we call the default CSS. In this case, an HTML tag will have a property display that is going to be block. Color is going to be internal root color. I don't know what that means, but let's look at something more. We see the head has also some styling. You can see the head says display none because we don't want to display the head. We got the body. The body, by default, bodies I'm not sure if this is true in Firefox, but by default in Google Chrome, the body will have a margin of 8 pixels. That margin is that orange square you see around the body here, and that will be of 8 pixels. Let's see, something cool about CSS, we cannot do it here, but we're going to get to that, is we could live edit it. So if I have defined my own CSS for the body, I could change this pixel to 9 and go increasing it, and it will live update, which is very nice. We're going to get to see that. So we see that the body will have a property called display that is going to be block. Let's look at something more specific like the H1. Look at all the styles that the browser by default is applying to an H1. An H1, it says, is going to be display block. The font size will be 2M, so that's another measurement, EM. It has a margin block start and a margin block end, which, as we highlight over here, it seems to be that space before the text and after. Those are called margins. And we have like font weight, bold, that is, we want the text inside of this H1 to be bold, or in general, browser will want to make that text bold to signify importance, right? Questions? Mm-hmm.
Font size, DX versus EM. DX is like a pixel code?
Yes.
And then EM is...
You'll need to Google that. EM is basically a relative measurement, but relative to what you'll need to research. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we see that H1. Let's look at the form, for instance. Form, we had display block, margin top. Okay, not very interesting. Let's look at the input. The input also has a bunch of properties set by the browser. It has text rendering, auto, color, initial, letter spacing, word spacing, display, text align, margin, cursor, text. You see how when I click on here, look at my cursor is the pointer, right? That little pointer. But when I hover over the input box and I click on it, now the cursor becomes like to that vertical bar that signifies you're about to type some text. We could even control that. We can control that little bar that appears there. What else do we have here? We have that it has some padding, and let's look at this one, for instance. Oh, look, this one is interesting. Oh, also, here you see, these are no different CSS rules than the one we're going to be writing in our CSS file. Here you have the selector. In this case, the browser is selecting the input tag, and then curly brackets and all the declarations where you have a property and a value in it, separated by semicolons. And now let's look at this one. Here, this is still the same. We have the selector. This is an interesting, more complex selector. The browser is selecting this input that is of type submit. We can also use this sort of selecting in our query selector. We can just pass in a string that looks like this, and this will grab only an input that is of type submit. And here we see a bunch of other properties. Color, you see the border color. Here is this is the color that we have in the button. Oh, also, I'm not sure if you can notice, but as I hover over these properties, it also highlights what I'm hovering over. So, like if I do this, for instance, this is the padding, that space around the button, or around the text inside the button. The border style, the border color also gets highlighted. So here this is a way in which you can inspect not only the styles that the browser will put on your stuff, but also the ones that you are going to put yourself. So let's look at what happens once we. So those are like the default styles. If we do that in Firefox, we'll see the differences basically if we inspect in here. But I'm not going to get into that. So let's uncomment this. Let's save that, and let's reload the page. So we get my styles, and now let's hover over. Let's go over the H1. We see that the user agent style sheet, which is the browser style sheet, is still there, and it's still setting the same properties. But note that now I have this rule, this CSS rule that is coming from todos.css line 10. And that rule is saying set the font size to be 12 pixels on all H1s. And you can see that now in the browser style sheet, the font size is crossed. That means we are overriding the font size, or something else is overriding the font size. In this case, is my own defined rule, which is the font size. Questions here so far? It's really important that you learn how to inspect the styles. This is going to help you tremendously. Like basically working without the developer tools is just coding without being able to see it, basically. So, also let me show you here like the live updating. You can see that when I click on the value here, font size, I could change it. I could type my own value here, 20, and I hit enter, and then that updates. Also here, you could use to change this, you could just double click it, and then use the arrow up or arrow down, and that changes live. This is really nice. Having the ability to not have to reload to sort of see changes. In fact, something that I recommend is try your styles here first, like color blue. And this way you have live updating, and then once it looks good here, something that I will do very common is just copy this rule and then paste it on my CSS file. You can see all the colors. You could even move over all of them. Okay, questions here inspecting your styles. Let's look at the li. The li is blue. Also, you have this tool here that allows you to click on any element and get information about it, basically. So if I click on here, then I can click on any element that I want to inspect. In this case, I want to inspect the li. Now the li gets selected here, and on the right, I get all the styles that are applying to the li element. In this case, I have introduce.css line 6. I'm defining a rule for the li that says that the color is going to be blue. Look at this also. This is the default style sheet for the li element. It says display list item, and so on. Also, we see some CSS properties, so CSS rules are inherited. That's when we saw that when we have the body color red and we added a new to-do, then that to-do text will be red as well. If we don't say that the li text should be blue, like here. Look, this is also nice. You can sort of enable or disable all disable declarations by clicking on these checkboxes. So you see by default this text is red because the body, I said that the color of the body should be red. So all the child of the body will have the color text red. And here we see that from the UL, so again, this is coming from the style sheet that the browser has by default. It says, this one is an interesting one, list style type. And then it says disk. What do you think this refers to? Just a wild guess. Yes, Bunil?
The way the text appears, you change the italic.
Close. Owen? The bullet point. Yes. This is what makes the bullet point be a bullet point. It's the disk. And there are some others. I think there are squares, triangles, others that you could change to make this something else. Mm-hmm. Cool. Questions here? Inspecting your styles. Yes, Louis?
As soon as you refresh, all of your changes are gone. Right?
That's a good point. Yes, if you are changing here, like live updates, this is the font size. Font size. Let's do 3 pixels. Now the text is super tiny. But these live updates that I'm making here, once I refresh, they are gone. So if you want to save those, you want to make sure you copy and paste them. Other questions regarding inspecting your styles, or about CSS selectors, properties. Cool. Let's see what else we have here. Okay, so let's look at this CSS reset. So this CSS reset is just standard for us to copy all this content and then have some people will add it here at the top of their CSS. Let's look at what the page will look like with it. See if anything changes. Oh, I guess let me comment this out. So I commented out all the CSS, and this is what our page looks like. I commented out all the CSS, and this is what our page looks like. Right? Oh, I forgot to do this one. Okay, this is what our page looks like. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncomment all the CSS reset rules. And let's look at what our page looks like now. Oh, we get that. This is a this doesn't look very good. But what this does do is it gives us more control as to what our inputs should look like. And let's look at it in Firefox as well. Now they actually look exactly the same. The user cannot see where the input box is, but it's here. But it does give us, that's why it's called a CSS Reset. It resets all the styles so that you can actually go in and make the input boxes look the way you want them to look, and make the buttons look the way you want them to look as well. So that's the CSS Reset. In this case, we'll need to like style the button and do the border of the button that we want and stuff like that. Also, there's like button styling, CSS buttons, button generator. There are some options here. So this is a default button. Look at these others: red, gray. These are button sizes. You can make them like this with some rounded corners, or you can make it a circle. Right? And let's look at ones in GitHub. In here we have like all these are buttons. All this stuff in here. The sign up button, these other buttons in here. This can also this could also like help you like style your buttons, where in this case I selected this. So these are some pre-made styles for buttons. Like people do them and then they share them online so that you can use them. Oh, this is a really cool effect. That's also possible with CSS. You see, like that will be the flipping of a card. So here you can play with this, like how much you want the size, but also you want to learn to do this yourself. Like you don't want just to copy this code from online. You could use these tools to get an idea of what you want, and then inspect the code. So here I could do get code, and this is the code that styles the button in that way. You can see has a bunch of properties. You see my button. They're setting a background. They're setting the border. They're setting font size, etc. So this is just so that you could get an idea as to ideas for buttons, basically. In this case, if I copied and pasted this code while I have a CSS Reset, then my button will look exactly the same in Firefox as it will look in Chrome. Okay, questions about the CSS Reset? So actually, the CSS Reset, what I like to do is take the CSS Reset code, and I oftentimes do another file that I call to-dos CSS reset.css, and I'll paste this here. And in the HTML, I just go in here, and I also import that. I just copied the previous line. This is also cool. I think all text editors can do this, which is just by being in that line, when you do Command-C, it copies the entire line. You don't have to highlight it. And then I paste Command-V, and then it copies the entire line. So here, I just want to do to-do CSS reset, so that I don't mix my reset file with my regular CSS file. So here, now let's go back. So remember here, I'm just linking the two CSS files. A page can have, I think, an infinite number of CSS files. Yes, Jonathan? Oh, that's a good point. Since HTML reads top to bottom, would the style change based on what CSS do I put first? I think it will. I'm not sure, but we can try it out. Let's try to do this. What happens if we do, let's do todos 2.css. I'm just going to have another CSS file. I want to copy this one, paste it, and I call this todos 2.css. And the only thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color, the background color of the body. So the question was, would the order in which you include the links in the HTML affect what style gets put first? So let's do, just comment out this. I'm going to comment out this one. And here I'm just going to say like red. So I have two to-do CSS. One is changing the background color to red. The other one is changing the background color to aquamarine. The question that we want to answer is, would the order in which you include them affect the CSS style? Let's look. So first we're doing the todos.css and then including the todos 2.css. Let's see. So we get that the body is aquamarine. Let's try to change this. Now the todos 2 is first, and then the todos CSS later. Now the background color is red. Yes, Winter?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So my HTML is showing on my screen, but when I add a link tag to link to my CSS, my HTML disappears.
That sounds like maybe a tag that is not being properly closed in the HTML code. So you'll need to look at that. I could also take a look at it in a few minutes. So here we discovered that the order in which we get the links will affect the style that gets applied. So basically, which one is it applying first? Is it applying the first one or the last one? What do you think? Is it applying the todos 2 CSS or the todos.css? Say that again? The second one? Let's look at todos. Yes. Right, todos.css is the second one. Let's look at them on this side. So todos.css is the one that has color red. And then todos2.css has aquamarine. So that is a later style sheet will override an earlier style sheet if they are trying to select the same element. Also, this should also be explained if we inspect here the styles. Let's do right click, inspect. Let's look at the body, and we have this. See, we have a rule in the body that is selecting the body, and it's coming from todos CSS 1, todos 1.css line 1, and then we have the same rule on todos 2.css, and it's trying to affect the background color, but we can see that that has that line through. That means the todos.css is overriding that property because to do the CSS comes last. We applied the last rule. Questions here? CSS. Okay, let's go for lunch and just be back here at 2. If you have like that, you'll also see so it will be like here. You can also see the point is to have a button that looks the same in on and the same in Firefox or the same in Browser. So it's to basically reset the CSS, reset the default CSS that all browsers will add to your elements so that you have. So basically the point is have no control. you have everything saved, and then you have it saved.
Yeah, I put it on there.
Oh, wow, you have a lot. Also, you have these as well. You just drag them.
Oh, these will.
I think I'm gonna
Well, they're, yeah.
also, that's right. That's it. There's a yeah, that would be great. Oh, actually, there's one more thing, which is so now open VS Code. Now what we went is you remember when we said add period alt map for that to work in here, we need to do 1%. This is just show you this page once you watch it for a first time. So this is VS Code. Every shortcut that you run on an app still applies here. We're going to do stuff going to the beginning of the line. So here, now you are going to install the code command so that you can do code period and it's going to go on VS Code. So for that, you do command shift and then type install. That just put the code command in kernel so that we can say code period.
Excuse me. As promised.
Oh, thank you.
Oh,
Yes, this is
I'll
so,
give it to you. It's really good.
it's so sweet.
Here's the cover.
Thank you very much. So that opened the file. So that file is empty.
Oh, because that's,
Do okay. Now close it up. So the open is empty. So you need this. If you all code to that empty file, you make that file look like this. You need to create.
that's actually a lot of percent.
That's it. And if you do like code, right now code in the terminal, code that code this will open the entire folder.
Oh, I see, so I can swap here. This one, said that it's got CSS Code. It's got web files.
So add
No, yeah.
yeah, you do.
There it is. It's
It's all. When you export it. So one of the advantages of VS Code is also that it helps you, like, it shows you the errors that you probably have with your CSS. It'll always be the lookup for this thing, this direction that you there, and also like jiggle lines in the mix. So that is saying something is not right. In this case, what's not right is that you have
probably too many.
common. That's it. So now we can say that.
Oh, actually, it's good. Because I had an automatic save that JR had sent. Does such a thing exist here, or is it?
Yes.
Okay.
You can open the settings. I think it's The settings you can find in the command comma or in code. Preferences, settings. Here, type here. So these are the settings you can. Yeah, that's fine. After the delay will be like after you spend. That will be like a window change will be like if you are in the code and you switch to Chrome, that is you change the window.
Oh, I see.
So
Well,
it's
I
like
thought this changed any typing.
Hola,
well,
where's Winter?
oh right. I don't know.
You already ate.
I'm not in
What's in your hand?
flame.
It was a gift from Steph.
Yeah.
Oh,
This is delicious.
I know. I'm naked.
I'll be there in a few minutes.
Okay.
So I should copy back
That's okay. After the delay is fine. After the delay will be like you start typing and then you stop typing after a certain amount of time.
Good old bottles. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Oh, I should have stopped the stream.